you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you all. Scott, I don't know where you disappeared to. Scott, thank you very much for not just the introduction, but thank you for your wonderful leadership. Scott is one of our most thoughtful and capable entrepreneurs in Massachusetts, and we like to brag about a lot of them, but I'm proud of him as our, and many of our colleagues are extraordinarily grateful for his leadership and contribution in terms of progressive issues and the environment. We thank you. Let me also, a special thank you to all of you here. The League of Conservation Voters entered my consciousness back in 1970 when it was founded. And the environment entered my consciousness way before that. My mother used to wake us up and take us on early morning walks just to introduce us to the power of nature. And when I left high school, I just reminisced about this the other day because I was privileged to give a graduation address at my alma mater, high school. And I was shocked by the fact that as I stood there, I could say to them, it's been 48 years. But it was 1962 when I left high school, worked full-time for Ted Kennedy in his first campaign for the United States Senate, and went home to find my mom engaged in putting together the first ever recycling program in our community, and she told us about the virtues of separating glass and metal and so forth, and we looked at her like she was crazy. But then that September, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring burst on the scene. And with it came a new sense of possibilities, a new sense of danger. The first thing I did when I came back from Vietnam was not actually protest against the war. It was to become involved in the organizing of Earth Day, 1970. And out of that unbelievable experience where 20 million Americans came together in one single day and said, we're tired of seeing the Cuyahoga River light on fire. We're tired of living next to toxic sites that make us sick. We're tired of air that sends our kids to the hospital and so forth. Out of that came this organization, which understood that we had to translate those concerns into political power, into election power. And so LCV started targeting races. And in that first year, out of 22 people endorsed, 17 were elected, and we began to make the difference. That's a remarkable record. And I'll tell you, we won some victories back then, folks, and we got to get that back into our bloodstream. It's in our DNA, but we got to make it work for us. I hear too many people who sort of want to say, oh, maybe we ought to do an energy-only bill, or maybe we ought to do this or that, or something less. I was on TV on Sunday with John Cornyn, and he said, well, maybe we ought to try and hit a single. And I reminded him, I said, look, when Babe Ruth and Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams and David Ortiz come to bat, they never thought about just hitting a single. They hit a home run. That's the American spirit, and that's what we ought to be doing. Now, let me tell you what happened. I want to remind you, a little trip backwards for a couple of minutes. In 1970, after those 20 million people came out, people understood that we had to take that to the ballot box. And so we started looking at who was the worst polluter in the Congress. And we targeted them. It became a formal program in 1996 in the LCV when the Dirty Dozen campaign started, but we officially had our Dirty Dozen back in 1970, and guess what? A whole bunch of them lost. And there is nothing like losing or being a survivor after you watch your colleagues lose to focus the intensity of the political mind. That's what happened. And so we passed the Clean Air Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Coastal Zone Management Act. We didn't even have an Environmental Protection Agency in the United States of America until after 1970, when guess who Richard Nixon was kind enough to write it into law. And I'll tell you folks, none of those things came out of the largesse of Washington. They came because you and the people of this country demanded it, and we made it happen. That's what we have to do today. Now, let me fast forward to today. Here we are. And Ted is here, you know, the founder of CNN, and it's a brilliant entrepreneurial career, and it's a brilliant concept. But all of our television is rendering the political dialogue of this country stupid. And all we have is a shouting match. People on there shouting at each other where facts are irrelevant and the truth is totally lost usually. And it becomes politics. It doesn't matter whether you tell the truth. And very few people are there to hold you accountable. And most of the reporting that we see on television today, with a few exceptions, where you get a terrific, like there was a terrific report on CNN the other night about what happens to people who are getting sick and getting cancer because of things in the environment, what's happening. That's the kind of brilliant reporting that we need in place of so much of what we get, which is reporting on fires and murders and floods and disasters. Now, I'll tell you, I've been in the Congress 26 years now, and I've never seen it harder to build consensus around anything than it is today. And if you can't have a discussion about facts and respond to them, and everything is reduced to the lowest common denominator of electoral politics, we're all in trouble. Our democracy is in trouble. And tomorrow we're going to have an example of it, where we have a resolution being brought by Lisa Murkowski to prevent the United States Environmental Protection Agency from doing what the Roberts Supreme Court told them they ought to do. And this amendment is being brought to us in the guise of us being told the EPA shouldn't do it, the Congress should do it, when the very people selling that message are the people who are trying to prevent the Congress from doing it. This is absurd. This is the worst kind of bait and switch, the worst kind of, this is 1925 Scopes trial all over again. That's what we're doing. We're living in a new know-nothing age, folks, where people are going to come up there and say, oh, I think we ought to do it. I think we ought to do it. But they're going to take away the lever that guarantees that we can get the job done to protect the American citizen. And then they're going to procrastinate and say, oh, well, we're going to do energy only. Well, we did energy only in 2005. We did energy only in 2007. Energy only will not send a price signal about the cost of carbon. It will not unleash billions of dollars of investment in the private venture capital sector. It will not do what we need to do to change behavior. It will just do some little feel-goody kinds of things that go off and make people think they've done something. And so we will continue. We'll continue to be right where we are today. Where we are today is a country that, despite wars, despite all of the volatility of the Middle East, despite the fact that our generals tell us we are funding both sides of the war, despite all of that, we are importing more oil today from foreign places than we were before 9/11. More than ever before in the history of our country. We send $365 billion a year plus to Nigeria and Venezuela and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Iran. $100 million a day goes to Iran. It's the Ahmadinejad tax that we're willing to pay instead of moving towards true energy independence. Now, the bill that we've put together in the United States Senate is not perfect. And yes, we're going to need to massage it. But I got to tell you, tomorrow, I believe we can push back against Lisa. I think what's shocking to me is every single Republican, I believe, is poised to vote for the Murkowski amendment, plus 3, 4, 5 or so, plus Democrats. I hope not more. I pray not more. Now, the Murkowski amendment is not going to become law. We need to stop it, but it's not going to become law. The House isn't going to pass it, and the President isn't going to sign it. But it's a sign of the challenge that we face in these next weeks to get common sense on the table. I just want to talk for a couple of minutes about the common sense on the table.